Hi, my name is Jem. I work in the Hollyhock Garden as a gardener, and today we are going to prepare a soil mix. And this is the soil mix that we make to do all of our sowing of seeds, our transplanting of the seedlings into bigger pots, and transplanting again into larger pots. And this is a mix that we use for pretty much all of that process for everything. And I'm going to give you the recipe, tell you what the tools are, and give you a basic ratio, because we have a ratio that's based upon a very high production garden, so we actually make it in wheelbarrow sized portions, and perhaps you will need for your garden to make a smaller amount, so I'll just give you the ratio and also show you how we do it for here at Hollyhock. So I'm going to show you what tools and ingredients we need for making this soil mix. So start with the big tools. You need a wheelbarrow of the ratio, the size that we're working with, a shovel, a good sturdy shovel. We have a 5-gallon bucket, again for the ratio and size that we're working with, a pair of gloves and to protect your hands, because you're going to also use a sifter, because you're going to sift the compost and we're going to sift the peat moss, and that will protect your hands. And now let's get to our cake mix ingredients for our soil. The first biggest ingredient is the compost, which we make ourselves. That is followed then by the peat moss, and this is a fine vermiculite, which is the best to use is the fine. You can use the medium, but fine is better. And dolomite lime, and a little bit of water, because you need a nice moist mix for planting seeds and seedlings. So here we are at the compost. There are many bins of compost in process here at Hollyhock, but this one is the most composted. It's been processing the longest, composting the longest. It's been turned. So this is the one that we want to use for the soil mix. And the reason being, anything raw, more raw than this one will burn the plants. It's too strong, and this is the ultimate compost. So, like I said, it's been turned. It's all about a year old, and it's just ready for sifting and using in our soil mix. Okay, so I have my gloves, I have my shovel, and I have my bucket. Got my sifter set up, so it's like efficiency. Get your things set up, you're all ready to go. And for this ratio, we need 2 buckets of sifted compost. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill the bucket. I'm going to sift it, but there's stuff that's taken out, the big chunks, pieces of wood, fibers that just aren't fine enough and will impede the growing process. I'm going to put that to the side. And what you want to do after that is sort of make a guesstimate about how much you've put aside, and you're going to sift a little extra to make sure it's about 2 buckets worth. And so that's what I'm going to do. All right, so here's our bucket, first bucket of compost. I'm going to pour it in. We're going to sift it. I don't do the whole thing at once because it becomes very difficult. But you're not squishing it through your sifter, you're shaking it through your sifter. And then the big chunks go to the side. And as with everything, you want to make sure you're doing things with awareness for your back and your body. So trying to use your core muscles and keep everything safe and healthy. So there we go. These chunks, these rocks and twigs are not suitable for our soil mix, so they're going to the side. And we're going to do 2 buckets just like this. another one. Okay, so we have sifted. Now we can take our strainer off. This is the sifted compost. Beautiful. It's ready for seeds and seedlings. It's nice, gorgeous texture. It's nice and decomposed, and it's got a few little stickers in there, and it's perfect. The garden will think it's delicious. I sifted out the extra big chunks, put them to the side, and then at the end, after doing 2 buckets like that, I assessed how much I put aside, and I thought, well, it's about a quarter, maybe a third of a bucket's worth, so I just did that little bit extra to make sure that this recipe is about 2 buckets, full buckets of compost. Alright, so next step, we're back at the greenhouse in the garden, and we're going to get a bucket of peat moss and sift it into our big cake bowl. Peat moss. I find that it's helpful for me to brush the materials from the side, because in general it seems to sift into the center, and then it's hard to sift through if it's compacted up under the sifter. This is a little easier than the compost because it's already fairly fine. And here we are being left with the twigs and unwanted big chunky pieces. Okay, so I'll take that. Sifted the peat into the wheelbarrow. The next part is peat is fairly acidic, so we're going to put a little bit for this ratio, about a 1/4 cup. You can adjust according to your measurements, but we're going to put about a 1/4 cup of dolomite lime in with the peat, and I'm going to mix it with the peat because that will neutralize the pH. Yeah, this is my approximate 1/4 cup. Okay, so I have here a dust mask, which is multi-purpose during these times, but at this moment I would like to use it because I'm going to deal with vermiculite. And probably with the others you can choose how safe you want to be with peat moss dust, but especially with the vermiculite and any of your amendments, it's really important to wear this so you're not breathing them in, because that can be very damaging. And so for the vermiculite part, I'm going to put on my mask, be safe, and then I'm going to mix it into our soil mix. As with anything, you're going to find your way of doing things. Personally, I find that the vermiculite is very light and dusty, so I like to sprinkle it with some of the water before I mix it, because that way when I'm mixing it's not quite so fluffy. And we do need to add water anyways into this mix, because when you're planting your seeds and you're sowing your seeds, planting your seedlings, the moisture is already present in the mix, and that's really helpful and important for them. So what I'm going to do now, sprinkle some water. I'm going to mix this as well and thoroughly as I can. And you can imagine if you're making a very fine, lovely cake, you don't want any chunks. You don't want a chunk of flour or a chunk of chocolate, although that would be kind of yummy. But the important thing is that your mix it's thoroughly and beautifully mixed, and that's the same goes for your soil mix. So you have a really beautifully, thoroughly mixed soil. Okay, just a small note about peat moss and vermiculite. They're not the most sustainable. They're something that's a concern for gardeners right now, and it's used across most gardens and nurseries and such because they really work well. But sustainability-wise, there's some issues, and so we currently in Hollyhock Garden, we know this, and we're working on figuring out some alternatives that would be more sustainable, whether it's core, which is a coconut fiber, or some other things. So that's in the works. We haven't solved that issue yet, but it's something that we're aware of, and it's good to be aware of as well as in your own garden, and think of what are some good alternatives to these, because they do work really well, but they have some challenges. The purpose of the peat moss and the vermiculite, they both are really important and helpful for water retention, so they'll just keep that moisture for quite some time, and nice and even. And the peat moss also adds a lightness to the soil mix, because you don't want your mix to be really heavy. You want a lightness for the seedlings to grow in, and that's what they're both good for. Okay, let's synopsize. It's a lot of information. And so we had 2 buckets. This was our measuring cup. It's 2 5-gallon buckets of sifted compost, and then 1 bucket of sifted peat, and a 1/4 cup of lime that's mixed in with the peat, and then we have a 1/2 bucket of fine vermiculite with sprinklings of water throughout, all mixed together very, very well. And so for your purposes, if that's too much, if that's too big of a quantity, then you can just think of it in parts. And so you've got 2 parts compost, 1 part peat moss, and a 1/2 part, you can think of it as like you could use yogurt containers, so you could use a measurement of your choice. And so the 1/2 part of vermiculite, and a sprinkle of lime, and you can't use lemon instead. This is dolomite lime. And mix well and enjoy sowing your seeds and planting your seedlings. Ta-da!